everyone, Miko here with Behavior Analyst Supervisor. Thank you for joining us for our free Wednesday Zoom calls. Here you're watching on YouTube, but you could also join us on Wednesday. If you're interested in the link to these calls to join live, feel free to send us an email at info@behavioranalystsupervisor.com. You can also just check out our Instagram. We post questions every single day on Instagram. We also post the link to our free Zoom calls. Every Wednesday, we go through a different task list item area, such as A1. We'll talk a little bit about that task list item, and then we'll go through 3 mock exam questions relating to that task list area. We hope that this provides an opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about the task list and also dive deep into question dissection. We here at Behavior Analyst Supervisor really focus on providing explanations on why an answer is correct and why it's also incorrect. So we appreciate that you joined us. If you have any questions throughout the duration of this video, feel free to shoot us an email, hit that like and subscribe button for more information. Also, you can always leave a comment and we'll be sure to reach back out to you. Thanks again, and I'm Miko with Behavior Analyst Supervisor. You'll also be hearing from Amy and Kevin. Talk to you soon.
What's going on, everyone? Miko here with Behavior Analyst Supervisor. Welcome to another free Zoom. Today, we're going to be going through simple schedules of reinforcement, which don't always turn out to be so simple, but that's what we are going to be talking about. So I hope this is helpful to each of you. If you have questions throughout the process, feel free to throw them in the chat, and then we'll obviously have time at the end for question and answer. A few quick announcements. We had our task list marathon this past weekend. I think it went really well. We'll be having another one sometime in June, so we'll have a date next week for the next one of those. And then the other thing is we have a Breakdown the Beast next weekend, April 8th. So if y'all are interested in that, just let us know. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get rolling on simple schedules. So I'm going to just turn my camera off because it pops up on the on YouTube when I upload it. So let's go ahead and get rolling. All right, simple schedule. So we're going to break it down variable versus fixed, and then ratio versus interval. And then within that, we will do a couple of practice questions, and hopefully we'll feel really good coming out of this. So we'll also refer to today's Instagram question at some point, because I know some people are confused on that, but let's do it. All right, the first thing is to think about fixed versus variable. So 2 types of simple schedules of reinforcement. There's going to be your fixed schedules and your variable schedules. And luckily, these are 2 of the things in behavior analysis that are what they sound like. So a fixed schedule means it does not change. It is a set amount or a set amount of time that must elapse and then a response, or a set number of responses. Our example here, Johnny gets $5 every time he takes out the garbage. So that's after a set number of responses, just one time. Fixed interval would be a set amount of time, so 1 minute, and then the behavior after the minute. That would be fixed. Variable, your keywords are on average, roughly, and about. So on average, roughly, and about. Anytime you see those in the question, that tells me it's variable. Variable just means it changes. It could be this or it could be that. So again, Johnny gets $5 about every other time he takes out the garbage. So this is like a fixed ratio 2 because it's every other, so that's every 2. And so it would be variable since we see the about. Cool. So that's the easy part. Next, we get into a little bit more tricky. We need to think about interval versus ratio. Interval is, we think of it as a time, but sometimes we think about that inaccurately as a time. And so what I want you to remember is interval is time plus response. Please do not forget the plus response. So certain amount of time needs to elapse, and then you need to engage in the behavior after that set amount of time elapses. Think about it like, have you ever seen those pill bottles that have a timer on the top? Like you can only get a pill out of it every couple of hours, so that way you don't take too many pills. That's what an interval is. You have to wait for that timer to elapse, and then you open the pill bottle and you can get whatever your medication is out of it. You can't get the medication before. You have to wait until after the time elapses. Therefore, that would be an interval. time plus response. So Mary is able to play video games after 20 minutes passes, and then she asks her mom. So her response is asking. She still needs to engage in the behavior, because if there's no behavior, it's non-contingent reinforcement or fixed time or variable time. And then 20 minutes has to elapse. What you will notice is I do not really care, and we don't really, it doesn't matter what occurs during the 20 minutes. All that matters is that 20 minutes elapses, and then you engage in the behavior after the 20 minutes. Again, think of that pill bottle with the timer on it, or think of it this way. When you press the buttons on your phone too many times, you're going to lock yourself out of your phone. When you lock yourself out of the phone, it says like 5 minutes. You have to wait 5 minutes, and then after the 5 minutes, after, not during, after the 5 minutes, you have to enter your combination to open the phone. That is an interval. Sometimes, not sometimes, but every now and then you'll see exam questions where it doesn't specify that. And I want to be very clear. A good example is going to have the response after the time. I probably sound like a broken record, so I've said that 10 times in the last 2 minutes, but it's very important. All right, and then ratio is just a set number of responses. Ratio tends to be a little bit easier to identify. Miss Martin allows her students to play outside after they complete 50 math problems. So all they have to do, 50 instances of math, and then they get to play outside. That is a ratio schedule. Sweet. That's interval, that's ratio. I don't have a slide, but I want to talk about non-contingent reinforcement real quick, or time-based reinforcement. So you'll see non-contingent, you'll see time-based. All that means is we are delivering reinforcement contingent upon the passing of time and not on anything else. So it really doesn't matter what behavior you engage in. It only matters that you do nothing, realistically. We use it in order to create an abolishing operation. So if attention is valuable, we know that if we give you attention freely, you may not desire it as much, or it will become less valuable because you're in a state of satiation. You have a lot of it. And so that's why we use NCR, and that's what a fixed time or variable time, time-based, or even non-contingent reinforcement. Those are all words you'll see. Sweet. Yep, NCR is the same thing as fixed time, or more accurately, fixed time is a type of NCR. So that's like the most accurate way to say it. All right, let's look at some examples, and then I do see a couple questions in the chat, so I'll make sure I get to those. But our first question, Yelena works with 3 different therapists throughout the week. When she is with therapist 1, she is required to clap her hands 3 times in a 5-minute period to contact reinforcement. What schedule of reinforcement is this? Fixed interval, variable interval, fixed ratio, or variable ratio? There are answers in the chat for accountability. And if you don't mind, just chat them to me directly, please. Sweet. So we're split. It's a dead split between A and C, which is pretty typical of these. Most people are saying it's either fixed interval or fixed interval or fixed ratio. So it says she has to clap her hands 3 times. So that's why everyone eliminated these variable schedules, which is great. It's definitely not a variable schedule. So now let me make sure you hone in on this. She has to clap her hands 3 times in a 5-minute period. So this does not say after 5 minutes elapses. This does not say 5 minutes and then 3 claps. It just says 5 or 3 times within a 5-minute period. This is actually would you guess it? It's a fixed, let me go to the next slide. It's a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement, fixed ratio, because she just needs to clap her hands 3 times. The observation period is 5 minutes. This does not make it an interval schedule. This is just the observation period. She engages in it within 3 times. She's going to get the reinforcement on the 3rd clap. So that makes it a fixed ratio. Again, required to clap her hands 3 times in a 5-minute period to contact reinforcement. Ratio schedules is just a set number of responses. Here we have 3 responses. Interval schedules, time response after. So If it said she was required to clap her hands after a 5-minute period had elapsed, that would be interval. That's not what this says. It says in. So that makes it a ratio schedule. I know we started with the hard one, but I just wanted you to see the difference in what it looks like in an applied example. And this is why we think it's so important to make sure you can apply this stuff. You can know your definitions, because I know each and every one of you can tell me what an interval and what a ratio schedule is. But until you can apply it in a clinical example, because that's what the test mostly is, it's very hard to get the questions right. So just make sure you're practicing that. All right, let's keep going. Nick has worked with a therapist to increase his self-talk. His therapist told him to reinforce himself each day by writing one positive affirmation. This schedule of reinforcement most closely resembles NCR, an interval schedule, a ratio schedule, or a compound schedule. Again, you can go ahead and throw your answers in the chat. All right, we have varied answers again. So let's go ahead and look at this. His therapist told him to reinforce himself each day by writing one positive affirmation. So the reinforcement is the writing of a positive affirmation, right? That is the reinforcement. This is a little bit of a tricky question, but again, the reinforcement is writing a positive affirmation. What's the behavior, y'all? What does he have to do? Well, it doesn't say anything. There's no requirement, right? His reinforcement is the actual writing of the positive affirmation. Don't think about the positive affirmation as the reinforcement, because it gets tricky, but it says reinforce himself each day by writing one positive affirmation. So that is the reinforcement itself. So this is a super hard example, but this is most closely related to NCR. If you picked an interval schedule, could be close, but I think it's closer to NCR because it doesn't say that he has to do anything during the day. It doesn't say that he has to do anything after. If you're thinking he has to write it, then I see where you're coming from. But again, it's very specific by saying he has to reinforce himself each day by writing the positive affirmation, meaning what is the reinforcement? Writing the positive affirmation is the reinforcement. And so there's no response required. That is the reinforcement. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to say it a couple different ways, but in order for this to be an interval schedule, it would be like after 24 hours passes, he needs to look in the mirror and then do something, right? He needs to engage in a behavior. So NCR creates an abolishing operation. It's going to decrease the value of a behavior, it's going to decrease the value of a reinforcer because we're satiating you with it. So if we give you free access, that reinforcer typically becomes less valuable. In this case, if we don't want him to engage in negative self-talk, we can freely provide positive affirmations, and that should decrease whatever he's seeking through the attention. Likely would be the function if we were looking at this in a behavior analytic manner. So once again, it's NCR because the reinforcement is writing the positive affirmation. It does not say that he needs to do anything in order to access it. It just says he should write it each day. It's not an interval schedule because we don't have time plus response. We don't really have a response at all. It's not ratio, once again, because we don't have a response. And it's not a compound schedule because we don't have two simple schedules combined. So sweet. Last question, and then I'll take questions. Chauncey must wait about 3 weeks before she can go to the bank and cash her check. This is an fixed interval, fixed ratio, variable interval, or variable ratio. What schedule do y'all think it is? Cool. So once again, no, actually we're mostly in agreement. Most people are saying variable interval. I would agree, variable interval is the best here. About is our keyword, so let's eliminate fixed because we see about every 3 weeks. So that's roughly about on average, about every 3 weeks. After the 3 weeks passes, she must go to the bank and cash her check. So she still needs to engage in a behavior here, assuming that the money is her reinforcement. You have to wait about 3 weeks. So that's our interval. And then you can go and cash your check and you get access to the money. That would be a variable interval schedule of reinforcement. So if that makes sense, I'm going to just show you a few things. First, I'm going to go to our Instagram so we can talk through today's question. And then I want to go to our website real quick. So let me go to our Instagram so y'all can see that. And then I also want to go to our website. But first, let's look at Insta. So today we posted a question on the Instagram page. That question was, Mr. Coke wants to increase the number of sodas drank per year. He took a sample and provided them with $10 every hour. Mr. Coke found that the soda consumption increased by 55%. Mr. Coke has used which of the following schedules of reinforcement? There are a lot of answers in the chat. I'm not going to scroll through them all, but lots of different answers. Mostly we are between fixed interval and fixed time. Remember, fixed interval is time plus response. So every hour they have to take a drink and then get $10. Well, that's not what this question says. So it can't be a fixed interval. It's certainly not a ratio because I don't even see a response, which is our key. No response makes this fixed time. Every hour they get $10. I know it's tricky because we want to increase something, sodas drank, but all we're doing here is providing $10 every hour. That's fixed time or non-contingent reinforcement, non-contingent reinforcement. The answer to that last question was C, variable interval. And then I just want to show you our website. If you're ever interested in our products, you can go here, check out the website. All of the calendar is here for the free Zooms. Breakdown the Beasts are on here too. If we ever do other live courses, we're here. If you want the recording to the Task This Week in Marathon, DM us on Insta, and I'll hook you up with that. You can also just enroll through here, and then we have a couple different packages. You can feel free to use the discount code PASS, and that's 10% off because you all come almost every week to this. I know there's a couple new faces, so I appreciate that. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to turn my face on so you can see me. Start my video. Cool. So I appreciate y'all coming. That's super nice. We'll be doing these every week. They're gonna starting next week, they'll be at 5, so a half hour earlier. So instead of 5:30, we'll be having them at 5, and they'll go till 5:30. So that's starting next week. I will post on Insta. I'm gonna spin the wheel, give away either a free mini mock. If you've already won the mini mock, we just hooked you up with a half-hour tutoring session free of charge. So spinning. And the winner today is Miss Nada. Miss Nada, I know you've won before, so go ahead and send me an email. And then we'll schedule you for a half hour sometime soon. Okay?
Sure, thank you.
You're so welcome. Cool. So now I want to answer questions. So feel free. There's one in the chat that I'm going to answer, and then there's a little hand icon you can raise if you have a question you want to say it out loud. Feel free to do that. But real quick, can sitting for 20 minutes or doing homework for 20 minutes be interval? No, it can't necessarily. So if you're doing something for 20 minutes, technically an interval is time plus response. So the response has to come after the interval. If you just need to do something for 20 minutes, that's probably honestly a ratio schedule, right? So if we're defining sitting as sitting for 20 minutes, and that's one instance of sitting, then that's probably a ratio. Or if you're using 20-minute blocks and the behavior has to occur for the entire 20 minutes, probably ratio. Interval is time elapses and then reinforcements available after the time. If you think about it from just a practical standpoint, the reason we use intervals is because we want to thin the reinforcement schedule. So if you think about it, you have to wait a minute before you can contact reinforcement. That's thinning the schedule. It doesn't mean you need to do the thing for a minute. It just means a minute needs to elapse, because eventually we might get to like a 10-minute interval. You're certainly not going to be doing something likely for 10 whole minutes. Instead, it's 10 minutes needs to pass before that reinforcement is available. So we're thinning the reinforcement. We're making it wait. So that's super, super important. The question on Instagram, the answer to that was non-contingent reinforcement, which is fixed time. The difference between DRL and DRD. This is a good question. It can be a difficult one, but The major difference, first and foremost, is DRD is a type of DRL. So the Cooper book even says that there's not a whole lot of difference between them. But the major difference is DRL uses IRT. So DRL uses inner response time, whereas DRD does not. Think about it this way. If I want to reduce the number of questions that a student asks, I can increase the time between questions. So you can ask a question and then you need to wait 10 minutes and then you can ask another question. In 1 hour, they can only ask 6 questions because 10 minutes in between. If I increase that to 20 minutes of IRT, you can only ask 3 questions because 20 minutes in between. So that would be an example of a DRL. A DRD would just be, you get 5 questions. You can ask them all in the first minute, or you can spread them out. But once those 5 questions are asked, I'm not answering anymore. And so that would be a DRD. There's not that time component. So that's the only difference there. Can you explain the difference between single subject designs and, so it's single subject and group designs. Yep, I sure can. So the main difference is just that single subject is one person or individual, whereas a group design is a group average. So individual is, once again, single subject. As soon as you start using a group, that becomes a group design. In behavior analysis, we primarily use single subject because we are concerned with each individual's data and how their behavior changes. If I look at a group design, that masks individual performance. What that means is I can't gauge individual performance. The example I always use is if I'm using a group design and I want I want 80% of my 10 8th graders to spell their words. If I want 80% of my class to spell their words and I have 10 kids, that means 8 of them can get 100 and 2 of them can get 0. My class average is going to be 80%. I'm going to look really good. But for those 2 kids, I left them behind. That's why we primarily use group designs. So that's the difference there. Miss Morgan.
Hey, Miko, I had a question on one of the mini mocks on the test or on the all you need.
Yeah.
There is one here. Here, it's about a slot machine. Joe enjoys gambling and regularly visits Las Vegas in order to try his hand at the slot machines. He presses spin button and is sometimes rewarded. He's won anywhere from $1 at a time to $4,000 over the past 3 years. A slot machine in behavior analytic terms can be described as indiscriminable contingency, fixed ratio schedule, variable ratio schedule, and a time-based schedule. I've just never heard that word before. Like, don't know what that. And the answer is indiscriminable contingency.
Yeah, definitely. So good question. So what an indiscriminable contingency is, it's one of the 7 ways that we program for generalization. And really all it means is you don't know when reinforcement's coming. So think about it as a variable schedule, which is what a slot machine is, right? It's a variable ratio. And so that's all we mean by indiscriminable contingency is variable. Cool?
Okay, I had one more if I
Yeah, go ahead. Feel free.
Okay, and then the next one was, it's another question from the mini mock and it's a BST question. It says, which of the following is least effective way to prepare an employee to implement intervention? One of them was have the employee shadow a experience RBT. The other one was prepare a PowerPoint presentation on the intervention. One was role play the intervention with the employee. And the next was model. The answer was prepare the PowerPoint. But in my mind, I was answering it by going through the steps of the behavior skills training. And we would have the employee model us, not RBT. So I got confused why that was that.
Yeah, so it's a good question. This is a hard one too, right? And so the issue or the major reason why, having them shadow an RBT, and again, like, so this weekend I was saying how we shouldn't assume, but you can imply. And it's totally fine to imply that you have followed the proper steps. So if there's an RBT working with a client, you can imply that you train them using BST, because we don't let an RBT work with the client until we've trained them using BST. And so in that case, that RBT should be implementing the program correctly. So a PowerPoint by itself, and that's what this question is meant to be. A PowerPoint by itself wouldn't be as good as them actually seeing the procedure in that way. Does that make sense?
Oh, so by itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, that
Yep.
makes sense.
Super tricky one. Cool.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. So the key differences between a brief FA and a trial-based FA. So a brief FA is longer, so it's 5 to 10 minutes. And it's a sterile environment, meaning you typically will do it in a room where you have control over the environment. There's not, other things. You take everything out of the room and then bring the reinforcers in as needed. Whereas trial-based is usually in a natural environment and almost always a classroom, almost always, not always, almost. And then there's 2 1-minute conditions for each, 2 1-minute trials for each condition. So during the first minute, you're presenting the establishing operation. During the second minute, you're presenting the abolishing operation. So that's what a trial-based would look like. And that's why it's called trial, because you do those 2 trials. Whereas brief is just a regular FA, but shortened. So that's the major difference. Resmi?
Yes, hi Miko. I emailed you this question, but now that we're here, I'll just ask you. I know when you say rate is usually for when you say per is usually for rate in a question, but I know it can also be for percentage, right? And can you explain how would you differentiate that in a question?
Well, yeah, per is, I would say don't use per as your discriminator. I know a lot of people do. We have a YouTube video from a couple weeks back about how that can get you in trouble. Per, people use that as their signifier, and sometimes it is, and usually it works, but you have to remember the formula for rate is frequency over time. So frequency over time. Percentage is same over same. So as soon as you have time over time or frequency over frequency, it's percentage and not rate. For example, if I say 30 minutes per hour, that's not a rate because 30 minutes is a duration, an hour is a duration. So that's duration over duration, which makes it percentage because that's all percentage is.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're so welcome. All right, sweet. So hold on, there's a couple more in the chat.